Well, good morning and welcome. I really appreciate you taking the time for the next 2 days to dive in depth into what it means to build great class libraries for the .NET framework. We're going to dive into a wide range of topics over the next couple of days and really give you equip you to understand the details behind how to build great class libraries to make developers very excited about targeting our platform. I'm Brad Abrams. I'm a program manager on the Common Language Runtime team, and I've been working with this technology for six plus years. And I started out working on the base class libraries, kind of the fundamental parts of the system. And very quickly, we realized that the amount of impact we can have on what developers use is kind of constrained in the BCL, and that what really matters is the sum total of classes that a developer has to work with. So that is what kind of kicked off this desire to see that every bit of our platform that we expose to third-party developers is exposed in the best possible way. And so a lot of the learning that we've done over the last few years in terms of how to expose great .NET class libraries is rolled up into this presentation. So I hope you get that out of the presentation. So what are we going to do over the next couple of days? Well, essentially what we're going to do is provide you with the guidance on how we're building the next generation of platform APIs. So the course is primarily focused on people building APIs to expose functionality to third-party developers. And I've read a couple people's bios that have posted them, and I know there's people working on applications and in test infrastructure and things like that. And I think you can get tons of benefit out of this class for those kinds of tasks. But you should realize that the primary focus of the class is on people exposing APIs to third-party developers. So after these 2 days of that you're taking to invest in the class, what should you be able to walk away with? Well, the first is you should understand the breadth of issues. You should at least know what the questions are. Whether you know what all the answers are or not, I'm not sure, but you'll at least know what all the questions are in terms of how you build and design your library. And one way I think about it is I like to equip you to have the arguments with your teammates so that you can reach the right kinds of answers. And then the other thing is I want to plug you into the right resources. So the right resources in terms of your peers in this class, in terms of documentation and tools, and other people, other API design experts that you can use to build your frameworks. Okay, so I've already told you a little bit about me. I had a chance to read some of the bios that were posted, but let me just get a sense for who's here. How many people are developers? Would say you're a developer. Okay, so it's about half. That's pretty good. And how many are program managers? Okay, I have a couple of program managers, so good. I'll try and keep the dev program manager jokes kind of balanced. So, and how many people in test? Okay, good. A fair chunk in test. I think that that test plays a really important role. And in fact, I like equipping testers with this knowledge more than anyone else, because I know that they're going to see to it that the designs meet this criteria. Testers are kind of our first users of our platform, so it's really important that they understand where we're going. So that's great. And any other job functions I didn't hit? Anybody from UE or somewhere else? Okay. I do think that it is great to have this kind of, to have your whole design team involved in building APIs. I've worked with some super smart API design experts, and I can tell you, even them, they require working in groups and kind of bouncing ideas off each other. It really helps if everybody in the team has a nice base level understanding of where we're going. So how many people are in Jim Alchin's organization? Somewhere in Jim or in platforms? Okay. And then where anybody in office groups? Okay, a few there. Okay. Anywhere else I didn't hit? Okay, MSN. Okay, good. Okay, so a fair balance as well. Okay, so course material. So you've got a copy of the slides. I'll point out that we keep the slide deck up to date all the time at this URL. You feel free to grab and steal content from there. I strongly believe that plagiarism is the highest form of flattery. So if you can do something with these slides in your own team or in your own space, please feel free. And in addition, the design guidelines document is up there. I was actually just writing my review yesterday, and we've modified this document almost 100 times over the last year. We've added new guidelines and things like that. So you can see that the document gets updated very frequently as we get new learning, we add new examples and things like that. So I very much feel like that document is the textbook for this class. Everything you're going to hear today is somewhere in that document. This course just brings some of that material to light and kind of puts some color on it. Okay, so we're going to be starting at 9. Obviously, you're here. I appreciate that. We're going to do lunch around 11:45 to 12:45 each day. But in addition, during those time slots, there's some bonus material each day. So you're welcome to go grab lunch quickly and come back for the bonus material, or you can elect not to come to that. It's not material that I felt was absolutely critical for the class, but because we're taping it this time, I thought it would be interesting to stick it in. And then we're not going to be able to finish right at 5. We'll roll over a little bit today, and then a little bit less on Friday. So just try and get all the material in. Lunch is in. There's a couple of cafeterias nearby. You can run out and grab those. So the other thing is, like you, I've been in classes like this before, and the instructor says, "Oh, don't do email at all," and that's very hard for a lot of people. But I would ask you to consider how you're investing the next couple of days, and what can you do to best get 2 days worth of knowledge out of this class. And if you sit and read email all day, that you might not get all of the benefits. So I'll let you make your own decision about that. Okay, so what's our audience? Well, we have lots of testers and developers and program managers, and there's certainly a target audience for the class, so that's good. But really, anybody involved in the design process of building great .NET class libraries, we want to educate all of them. I want to emphasize, though, this isn't an introduction to .NET or C# or managed code. I assume you have a good working knowledge of the platform before you come in here. And it's also not an OO design class. I struggle with that a fair bit because I think that the single biggest thing that you need to know as an API designer, after understanding the framework, is object-oriented design principles. But the problem is that's a 2-day class in and of itself, and there are people that are much more competent than me to give that training. So I encourage you, if you don't feel really comfortable with OO design concepts, I encourage you to invest in some training in that space. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? Well, this is the high-level sort of overview. So right now we're setting the stage. We're going to drill into some naming conventions. Then we're going to talk about the different kinds of types in the system and when you should use one or the other. Then we break for lunch, and we do a usability presentation. Stephen Clark has been doing API usability studies for the last couple of years, and he has some learning that he's gone through after watching countless people come in and try and use APIs. And then at 12:45, he's going to actually show a bunch of usability clips from that. And I would encourage you to be back in time for that. At 12:45, you're going to actually see some APIs that I designed, and developers struggling with using them. He always loves to show those to make fun of me. We certainly learned a lot from that, as well as some other things. And I think that you can start to appreciate where developers are coming from by watching those. And then Christoph Swalina is going to come in and talk about designing APIs that are progressive in terms of APIs that can be used by developers that are really into the nitty-gritty, low-level details, as well as developers that are not necessarily computer scientists that just want to get a solution accomplished. And that latter camp tends to be the breadth of developers on our platform, the largest chunk. Then I'm going to come back and finish up talking about the different kinds of members on a type and when you should use one or the other. I'll talk about designing inheritance hierarchies. And, I'm very happy to have Rico come in. He's an architect on the CLR team that's focused on performance. And he's going to talk a little bit about performance in general and kind of convey some performance thinking into your head. 'Cause that's kind of a very important issue in the managed code space, especially as you're building platforms. And then I'm going to start, I may not finish, but I'll start the lesson on kind of applying some of the things Rico talked about in terms of what should we do because it's a garbage collected environment, how does that affect your APIs. So how many of you are actually working in 100% managed code? There's no legacy. It's a brand new project. How many have a brand new project? Okay, that's good. That's good. A quarter, or maybe close to a third. So you guys can sleep in tomorrow if you'd like. But for the rest of you, Sonia is going to come in and do a very important presentation on interop, on how to get the most, how to leverage the infrastructure we've already built, the code we already have that's working. It works just fine. We just have to expose it in a nice way for managed developers. And Sonia's going to talk about some best practices for doing that, times when you should use the C++ language, when C#'s better, and things like that. Then we're going to talk just very briefly about the versioning story. As you're building V1 APIs, what should you think about with respect to versioning going forward? And then Michael Murray is going to come in and talk about issues around packaging, deploying and shipping assemblies. And then the bonus material tomorrow is around FXCOP. There's going to be some detailed information on how to use the FXCOP tool and check different things. And then similar to today, you should be back at 12:45 to see kind of very quick demos of how FXCOP enforces a lot of the things that we talked about on day one. FXCOP can automatically check a lot of that for you. And then Brian Pepin's going to talk about how to plug your infrastructure into Visual Studio. The vast majority of our developers use Visual Studio. What can you do to leverage Visual Studio the best and provide the best kind of experience in that? And it turns out there are some very cheap things that you can do to provide a big bang, and then there's some very expensive things you can do that also provide a lot of support. And then Sebastian Lang's going to come in and do a presentation on code access security. And that is one where we're going to start a little bit from ground zero and work our way all the way up on code access security and how it applies to your framework. And then we'll talk, I'm very happy to have Jeffrey Richter, who's a noted author and industry pundit. He's going to come up and join the speakers and do some extended Q&A time at the end of the day, Friday. Okay. So, setting the stage here. So, what you're going to be able to do here is going to expose you to some base level terminology for how I talk and how my language is riddled with these terms. We're going to talk a little bit about WinFX, because that's the primary platform push Microsoft's making right now, and the goals behind that. We're going to recognize the role of guidelines, what purpose they have in the world, and how they apply to your system. Okay, so I've already talked about managed code. Managed code is code whose execution is closely managed by the operating system. And unmanaged code, that's all the other code in the world. So essentially, managed code is code that's garbage collected, produced by C#, VB.NET, that kind of thing. And unmanaged code is all that other code, C++ code that's kind of written before .NET. And then the other big pivot I talked about is libraries. So libraries expose APIs for third-party developers. So if they are what you want other people outside the company to program against. And then applications are kind of in software. So we're going to be focused on the library angle today. Okay, so I actually had an opportunity a while back to be in a presentation similar to this, and Bill G was doing some Q&A, and so I asked him. I said, "What's the Microsoft business model? You know, kind of how do you see us making money?" And I can't claim he gave exactly this answer, but it was close enough. And this is the way kind of I think about our view of the world. The way, and I think this is important to understand this because it helps you understand what your role, why the naming of this parameter matters in terms of Microsoft's overall business goals. So our business strategy is we do some kind of platform advances. Now, in the case from DOS to Windows, it was GUI programming. In COM, it was the component-oriented nature, that some kind of platform advance that we make. The 32 to 64-bit will be one that we're getting ready to make, some kind of platform advance. But turns out the users don't buy platform advances, right? The platform advance they don't buy new operating systems because the operating system is cool, for example, right? What they buy is the operating system coupled with some initial set of exploited applications. And when that happens, when there's some exploitive applications that use that new advance, then that creates some value for customers, and they buy that. And then because there's that value, then there are more people are willing to buy that, and there are more applications are out there because there's more copies of whatever that platform advance is, whether it's the OS release or the next version of Office. There's more of the platform out there, so more customers buy it, so there are more solutions built on top of it. And that just continues. This is what we call the virtuous cycle, that it just continues, and it creates more revenue for the people building the applications and for us as we build the platform advances. But it's important to remember that it's the platform advances that is kind of the center of that. And it is only through the third parties building applications on top of it that we end up reaping the benefit from it. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you too much with this, but our platform advance story has been very clear over time. It goes from Microsoft DOS, we moved to 16-bit Windows, 32-bit Windows, and then we've been in this Win32 stage for a while, and we're at we're very close to starting the move to WinFX, and that's the next generation of programming surface built on managed code and following these guidelines that we're talking about. So as I talk internally to teams, we coined this term we call the WinFX Prime Directive. Of course, we have to use some kind of geeky sci-fi analogy here, but the Prime Directive here is that we want to provide in the Longhorn time frame, we want to provide first-class managed APIs to all broadly used system technologies. And what we mean by first-class is APIs that follow the guidance that we're talking about here. And managed, it's obviously kind of built on the CLR. And then all broadly used system technologies. So there may be some kind of niche functionality that we don't get covered, but anything we would expect mainstream application developers to use, we want to make sure it's covered with managed interfaces. So about design guidelines in general, like I told you, I've spent 6 or so years thinking about design guidelines and working in the space, so I have some philosophy around it. And I'll be honest with you, it's easy, so I'm just honest with you and tell you, a lot of the guidelines are subjective. You know, flip a coin in some of them. We could have cased things this way or that way, but you know, we chose one way. And there's some inherent value in conforming to that way, because everything else does that. Developers have built up in their head a mental model for how things work, and as we're consistent with that gets more and more kind of ingrained and set in, and developers are more productive because of it. And it's about conveying ideas to developers. If there was a way that I could you know, film Anders Hausberg popping up in every box and explain how to use each feature of the platform, I would do that. That would be great. But unfortunately, we don't have the technology for that right now, so we have to use other means of communication with developers. And we can communicate with developers via the docs and via MSDN and a bunch of different ways, but the best way to communicate is via the medium they're working with. So we're exposing this API set that's kind of like a novel or actually a poem for developers, and they kind of get meaning out of using the APIs. They know, because it's a property, they know something about it. Because it's plural name, they know something about it. Because it's suffixed in stream, they know something. And as long as we agree on what that set of grammar is, what those words we use to mean are, then we can have some good communication there. And then .NET design guidelines, more specifically, we're about easy to use. If there's one thing we're doing in the platform, we're trying to make developers more productive. As developers are more productive, they'll build more and better solutions on our platforms, and that means that our platform will be more valuable to customers. That's really what we want to do. So we want to make it easier to use. We want to raise the abstraction level and provide more component-oriented development environment. But at the same time, we want to target the breadth of users. So we want to target everybody from the guys building, wanting to control every aspect of the system, the kind of very small handful of people in each company that understood exactly how iDispatch worked and all the different comm marshaling. We want to target that person and make them feel comfortable with our new set of APIs, as well as maybe the person who's a rocket scientist. Literally, we interviewed a person who's a rocket scientist at Boeing, but they use Visual Basic to do some control automation and testing. So they were rocket scientists, but they weren't a computer scientist. We want to have a platform that scales from this kind of low-level geeky guy all the way to the rocket scientist who's not a computer person. Right. So I think all of the guidelines kind of boil down to what I call first principles. What's the first principle? And in fact, as I interact with you around in the alias and questions over the next couple of days, you will know that I'm not sure of the answer when I say, well, let's go back to the first principle. What's the first principle? And that is, what does it look like to code against? Or what's the developer's experience with that solution going to be? And I think that's the kind of question you should be asking yourself all the time when you're debating between two different designs. Well, what design provides the nicest, most intuitive experience for developers? And so I give this example of console.writeLine. We stressed a bit about what Hello World would look like. We really wanted Hello World to be a good experience on the platform, as that's how people make knee-jerk evaluations. But we also wanted this really complex, I shouldn't say complex, we wanted a very powerful streaming model that enabled a lot of pluggability. So how did those worlds interact? Well, we ended up providing an abstract streaming classes with readers and writers and things like that. But then we simplified it down. We said, well, what's the one line of code look like? Okay, we want it to look really nice, so let's provide a console class with a static method on it called WriteLine, and it'll be very clean, and it'll just plug into the system. So, just touch briefly on the CLS. The CLS is a contract that you will probably be writing your platform APIs in C# or C++. Or possibly Visual Basic, but your users might be writing in a different language. They might be writing in COBOL or Fortran or VB or whatever. So how can you ensure that what you write is nice from their languages? And the CLS does that for you. It's a set of rules that the compilers actually enforce. So as of WIDB, or V2.0, all the compilers actually enforce the rules that make sure that your framework, your library, will be exposed in a nice way to those developers. Okay, so what are we not going to cover? Like I said, we're not going to do an introduction to .NET, not an introduction to C#. I have a bunch of developers in the room, so I'm not going to talk about source coding conventions for you, like tabs, where the tabs should go, the braces. I turn that over to you as an area that you can have creative freedom in. I think it's probably a good idea to standardize on something, but because it doesn't affect the developer surface of the platform, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. I also know enough to not talk about implementation details with you most of the time. Again, I'm not a developer, so I'm not going to tell you kind of when to use a splay tree, when to use a linked list. We're not talking implementation details in this class. It's another class for that. And again, not an OO design class. Okay, so we talked about how WinFX is starting this virtuous cycle, the prime directive, a little about guidelines. So I'm just gonna press ahead to the next lesson as we're already behind.